but also probably aware that Miller had his back turned.
Williams looking for Yacht. McKay Jorgensen going body to body, and Ben Yacht says, "This is my disc." Yacht was just ejected from the game by the head official, Joe Strong. So we just got word that apparently Bryce Merrill, the coach of the Salt Lake Shred, has used the integrity rule to say that Ben Yacht should be back in the game. Bryce Merrill, the coach of the Salt Lake Shred, joins us from down on the field. Bryce, we know we only have a minute or two, but first, the integrity call. What happened on that sequence? You were right there, and the decision that you made to bring Ben Yacht, can you explain it?
Yeah, I think Yacht was making a business decision there. I think he's absolutely gassed. He's sucking cans of oxygen, and I didn't want to give him an easy out on the field, so I want him to be out here for the second half and see if he can play all 4 quarters with the Salt Lake Shred.
Interesting.
Welcome back. It's Swing Pass. We're returning from the elevation and the highs of an absolutely jam-packed Week 12 slate full of action. New York conquering their West Coast trip through Colorado and Salt Lake, once again asserting themselves as the best in the land. Empire now 11-0, 26 straight wins, odds-on championship favorites. Yet again, they continue to march towards a second straight perfect regular season. They would become the first franchise ever to accomplish such thing. We have so much to talk about today. I wanted to start off talking there. There's the Ben Yacht spike. There were 2 overtime games. There's playoff drama in each and every single division. Daniel, I'm going to get to our weekly tradition of running down through the scores and just getting some top-level action, but I want to ask you, how was your trip out to Colorado? What did you take away from this Week 12 bonanza, right? This was one of the most entertaining weekends of AUDL I've ever bared witness to. If I was just a fan tuning in and saying, what the hell is this ultimate Frisbee thing for the first time, I would be hook, line, and sinker right now after what we just watched.
It was so exciting to be in Colorado. Like, even though New York ended up winning by 4 goals, and really this goes for the Salt Lake game too, like, these games were super fun, super exciting, really close for the vast majority of the 48 minutes. There was like so much chirping going on between the two teams too, like between Atkins and Yacht and really everyone participating. A lot of energy in that stadium too. Obviously the fans hit, I think, close to 2,000 in Colorado, over 2,000 in Salt Lake. Just the scenic views alone in that venue like made the experience for me, but the collective energy from both the teams and the crowd was incredible to be around. So super thankful for the opportunity to have been there.
Energy, I think, is exactly the right word. And it seemed to not only hit on those 2 games that New York was in, but really extended elsewhere throughout the league. I mean, again, you had the thrilling finish in Oakland as the Spiders once again crawl back from the depths to pull out an all-important overtime win, setting up a Week 13 final regular season matchup with, again, Los Angeles for the second straight game. All-important battle for both teams. You have an overtime game again between DC and Philly. DC ends Philadelphia's season. There's just kind of pandemonium happening as we barrel towards the end of the regular season. I know we kind of talked about it in the preview episode, but my gosh, it is so nice to have this much excitement at the end of the regular season calendar. It's just felt like it hasn't quite been this way the past couple of years. It's felt like we've had things already well and cinched up by this point in our year. And this year, there's so many loose ends going into this final Week 13 slate. And, 10 out of 12 teams have clinched their spots. Only the East and the West each have a single playoff spot remaining. But there's still so much undecided as far as who gets what home field advantage going into the final weekend. There's still so much unsettled. I'm really my appetite just continues. I feel like, again, at this point in the season, I'm a little worn thin. I'm a little ready for the playoffs. And I find myself thinking, can we just extend a couple of these last little matchups, like a week or 2 more?
I also just want more New York road trips to wherever. I want to see them literally beat every team in the entire league because, they bring a very distinct energy. And I think they I think they've embraced kind of their villain target on their backs mindset this past weekend. Yeah, I think they've pretty much solidified it, which is great, and I love it for them. I love it for the league. It's been fun to see.
I mean, it was a 3-spike day on Saturday night for the Empire in Zions Bank Stadium. We will get to that and all of the drama of the Empire road trip in just a second. I quickly wanted to start off with a full rundown of scores and results from Week 12. Of course, starting with the Empire on Friday night in Colorado, the Summit, putting up a great battle at first, but that Empire defense just locking in and making things impossible, particularly in the fourth quarter when they got a series of breaks to pry open the lead, finishing with a 19-15 win before they traveled to Zion Bank Stadium to face the 11-0 Salt Lake Shred. Saturday night's game of the week matchup lived up to all the hype, and I've got to say, it was really because of that Salt Lake home crowd. They were just electric. Starting a good half hour before the opening pull, it felt like there was just an eighth person on the field with the Shred on offense or defense anytime they'd make a play. When Chad Jorgensen got that block on the first few throws, or I'm not even still sure if he got a piece of that disc, but he just challenged it well enough to force the New York offense turnover. I literally thought that stadium was going to explode somehow. Like, there was just... I thought one of the field mics was going to give out. There was just so much crowd noises and enthusiasm. But once again, New York kind of holding steady throughout the four quarters. They have been the best team ever, and I don't hesitate in saying this anymore after this weekend, the best team ever at closing out games. They showed this against the Shred, who continued to battle on offense, I thought, very admirably throughout all four quarters. They continued to adapt to the multiple forms of defensive pressure that the Empire brought on, but it just wasn't enough. It never is against this Empire team. Again, they improved 11-0, 26 straight wins. 18 straight opponents have not scored 20 goals on them. That is how miraculously this defense has played for the past year plus on the calendar. They're just at an all new level as far as D-line talent, depth, and execution. I think it's just a historical run for that team's defense. Elsewhere, we alluded to it before, but Oakland coming back from the depths of a 6-goal second half deficit against LA, using all 8 legs to crawl back into the game, and some miraculous plays from a few players making their professional debuts. Spiders continue to unearth talent and youth all throughout their roster whenever they need it. They win in overtime 20-19. Improved to 7-3, move a shade above Colorado in the West Division standings, and now set up a hugely hyped Friday night game of the week matchup. Again, they will face off against LA for a second straight game, and this will determine not only who makes the playoffs between Oakland and LA, but also could determine if Oakland gets to host a playoff game, which, as you saw on Sunday and as we've seen throughout this season, the Spiders are one of the best home teams in capturing that stadium's energy and using it to push their opponents. They continue to get these just end of quarter nail biter victories in the fourth and overtime. If they somehow get a home playoff game against Colorado, that will tilt all of our expectations as to what this season was going to look like out west. Continuing to move on, Atlanta getting a huge win against their rivals, 25-19 on the road against Carolina. They improved to 9-2 and secured their first ever regular season South Division title. The Hustle have looked like the class of that division for most of the season, and after splitting the first 2 games against the Flyers to begin this season, they get the most important rubber match win in Week 12. Again, they improved to 9-2. Carolina falls to 6-4. Atlanta will host the South Division Championship game in the playoffs and get a first-round bye, eluding the Austin Soul and saving themselves one extra game on their calendar. Elsewhere in the Central Division, Minnesota, after falling behind big and early, using just an overwhelming defensive effort once again in Seaphone Stadium to clear the Chicago Union 22-13. Minnesota also clinching their first ever regular season division title in the Central Division. Hats off to the Wind Chill franchise. They now set themselves up, most importantly, and maybe more favorably than any team in the league as far as getting playoff momentum. They will host the Central Division Championship game. They get a first-round bye, and most importantly, they are now one game away from making their first ever championship weekend appearance, which will be in Minnesota, giving the Wind Chill a possible home field advantage throughout the playoffs, which, like Oakland, we've seen this Minnesota team become completely different inside of Seafoam Stadium and in Minnesota in general when they have their crowds behind them. This is a defense and momentum built team. They will continue to succeed if they can ride those characteristics into a deep playoff run. Indianapolis, also after faltering in Minnesota last weekend, gets back on the horse, and they clinched their second straight playoff appearance with an 18-16 win at home over the Pittsburgh Thunderbirds. Indy improves to 8-3. Pittsburgh falls to 5-6. They are now eliminated from the playoffs. It was a very admirable second half run from Pittsburgh to keep themselves playoff viable until the penultimate weekend of the regular season, but they miss the postseason for the third straight season. Again, we mentioned it in the beginning. DC goes on the road and ends Philadelphia's season 20-18 in overtime. DC improves to 8-3. Philly falls to 5-6. The Phoenix start the season with 4 straight losses. They win 5 in a row, including some pretty darn meaningful matchups, especially that Week 6 one against Carolina. But by losing their last 2 games, the Phoenix are now eliminated from the postseason. They will not get to extend their playoff streak after qualifying last year. Unfortunate circumstances for them. And meanwhile, elsewhere, Toronto miraculously still alive in the postseason contention with their road win in Detroit, 25-13 over the Mechanix. Toronto now 5-5, needing to win both of their remaining games, as well as get help from their countrymen in Montreal, defeating Boston in this final regular season weekend. Portland and Dallas, notably, get off the schneid and finally get wins in 2023. Portland on Friday night, 18-15 at home over San Diego. Dallas on Saturday, 23-16 over interstate rivals from Houston. Hats off to both those franchises. Nitro snapped a 19-game losing streak dating back to the beginning of 2022. Dallas continuing to play impressively here in their final few matchups of the season. Their offense has really come alive of late. Alec Wilson-Holiday has been electric as a receiver on that unit. They continue to play, I think, where we expected them to come into the season. And so it'll be interesting for a team that suffered so many injuries at the beginning of the calendar, so much roster turnover, if they can continue any kind of momentum going into the 2024 season. Those are all the notes that I have as far as a general recap of all of the insanity that just went on. Again, 2 overtime games, the New York road trip, the Central Division drama wrapping up, and all 3 seeds now being clinched in that division. I forgot to mention Chicago, despite losing their game by 9 on the road to Minnesota, did in fact clinch their own playoff berth. It is the 4th straight appearance for the Chicago Union. They will go on the road to face Indianapolis in the first round of the Central Division playoffs. All right, now we get to come all the way back, talk some game analysis, also get into some more broad playoff picture stuff. Daniel, I want to just start with probably most obviously New York. We could tackle a whole myriad of different ways in which to address this Empire team. Where I want to start is the defense. Again, this is a team that now has the league leader in goals and Jeff Babbitt, the league leader in assists and Ryan Osgar, and probably the most unquestionably talented group of offensive players ever. What is happening for this New York team right now and their successes and the dynasty that is truly becoming apparent in what they are constructing over on the East Coast? It's back to the cliche. Defense wins championships, and there's been no better D-line unquestionably for the past year plus than this Empire unit, right? Like, they just have everything imaginable, and they showed that again and again for 8 straight quarters on the road against 2 really impressive offenses in the Summit and the Shred in very disadvantageous conditions at altitude, playing against fired up home crowds, not having familiarity with many of these matchups. Again, these are not squads that match up particularly often, even outside of pro condition settings. And yet the Empire just put a damper on anything opponents try to do against them. I mean, you talk about like an analogy or a metaphor for this Empire team. It is a pressure cooker, right? They put a lid on you and then they just slowly turn up the heat. And you see it again and again. They just break teams open at a certain point. Some teams last until the second half. And those are the teams that I think we always now consider to be the true contenders. The DCs, I think Salt Lake did a fantastic job of themselves. I thought Colorado did until it finally got to them in the fourth quarter. And we saw the inconsistencies that we've seen from this Colorado offense throughout the season as they struggled with injuries and rotation adjustments. It added up, right? And New York is the exact opponent that it cannot add up against. And what happens is they rub it in your faces in front of 2,000 people in your home stadium, right? And they get a Callahan late in the game just to kind of add salt to the wound. It's a different level of defense, right? We've been talking about that. And it's not just strategy. It's not just personnel. Antoine Davis is playing some of the best ultimate of his career. Ryan Osgar shouted him out in the post-game interview on Saturday, but he deserves more flowers here. They found the truest role for him, which is running wind sprints on a rail against opposing teams' best offensive players. And like Antoine is just a prototype of an athlete, right? And they have figured out exactly where to implement his tool set. And it speaks to the larger thing that New York continues to do on this defense. Ever since they really shifted over Ben Yot from winning 2 straight MVPs into now becoming one of the best pullers in the league and sort of the emblazoned logo of this defensive revival, right? Like they have talent, they have depth. They've got 2 starting lines of defensive players, something that no other team in the league has at this point. They can just throw 2 to 3 different rotations of what they feel to be their starters at you, depending on what look they want to give, depending on if they're doing a roller setup or they're playing matchup or they're playing a spongy zone. They kind of have whatever tool available, but then they utilize those tools better than anyone. They identify matchups better than anyone. And it's a treat, honestly, each week getting to see who draws the John Randolph matchup, how they use Josue Aloro, where Breton Tan starts to fit in. They added Breton Tan out of nowhere this year. That man came into this league in 2017 and started locking down some of the most legendary handlers this league has ever seen, in like Derek Alexander and stuff, as a teenage rookie. He's sort of flown under the wire the past few seasons due to injuries, not playing as much. When he's available, he's one of the best matchup defenders in the mid-space in the league. And he proved that again and again this weekend, where it's just, he's sticky. He just doesn't leave your side. And he's got that kind of spring box athleticism. He showed it in deep space on Saturday night. He showed it getting the Callahan on Friday night. He might be their like 7th best defender on certain rotations, or depending on what they're trying to do in a given setup. This team has 4 different 10-plus block getters so far this year. Antoine Davis and Ben Katz both have 9. They lead the league in takeaways. They allow the fewest points. There's just nothing you can do to sustain an offensive attack against New York right now. And I'm kind of out of words at that point, because they're just a hammer. They're a hammer, and they just go around smashing offenses, right? And they just wait for you to break. They just wait for it. And then that's just Drosts, right? Like, it's just backline Drosts blitzing you.
I think Colorado came out a lot stronger than I probably anticipated them coming out. And I think the fact that the game was so close in the first half probably motivated New York a little bit in the second half. But I also think there was very little doubt that eventually that D-line was just going to take over the game. And Matt Stevens even said to me at halftime, like, that was his prediction. Like, yeah, they'll probably trade points for the first, bit of the second half, but at some point the D-line's going to make a run. And yeah, it took until, the 10 minutes left in the fourth quarter to actually ignite that, but it felt inevitable. And even though Colorado was playing great the whole game, there's just like a comfort about the entire New York team, both offensively and defensively. Like after turnovers, this D-line just boasts like 7 really good offensive players too. So you just trust them to punch in breaks when they get opportunities. And like there's no team that can really match them in that way, right? Like there's no team that can play as consistently on both sides of the disc where there's openings for the other team to pull away. Like Colorado was never going to pull away from New York and never build a big enough lead to sustain a potential break train from New York. So it's really just like there's no recipe to beat it at this point, right? We haven't seen anyone beat it since 2021 championship game, and that was because Carolina had like a near perfect game. That's what it takes. You have to have like a 7 turnover game. That's the only way you can beat New York, because they don't make mistakes.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, like to your point of how this whole team kind of complements itself in every direction, the style and the limitations that this defense imposes on opposing offenses is exactly in line for the kind of artwork that these offensive drives construct, right? Like this is the best possession team. This is the best closeout team. And so to your point of you can't create any sort of gap, so you're stuck even playing your best game of your life, trading off with the team who doesn't lose in that circumstance. That's their strength. They want to play you trading out. They want to be on a high wire fencing you. They want you to slip and they want you to fall, and they're betting 100 times out of 100,000 times. I should say 100,000 times out of 100,000 times. Sorry, math isn't good when I'm in my rant mode. But they were betting on themselves every time to win those encounters, and you just see it play out again and again and again.
Yeah,
like
we have
keep
26
trying to hype
games
up
of proof in the last 2 years.
We keep trying to hype up what can a team do to get through to New York? What can you do to sort of sustain any? I don't know. Okay. I thought Salt Lake gave a fantastic run at it. I thought that their offense did as well as anyone basically outside of DC of sustaining against the onslaught that is the Empire defense, of taking a punch, retaliating. Jace Dunabile going off for 10 scores, almost 500 yards, no turnovers. They left him alone, and he absolutely torched them and kept them in the game throughout.
Throws, I feel like his throws have gotten so much better as the season's gone on.
The Salt Lake people act like, oh, of course he's been this good. No. I think you're all hyped up on your homeboy, and like he's great. He was great for them last year, but like this, to your point, this dimension that he's developed as a thrower,
it's new. Yeah. Also, even like you know how Salt Lake's always like everyone's so good at those warning track like leading throws after they catch the huck, like on the goal line, like that one that he bended perfectly to, I think it was Sean Cannell coming up, like even Cannell. Like I don't know, there's just like such a craft to his throws, and like he's getting perfect float on all of his hucks, just hitting his receivers in stride. He was just like a goal scorer at the beginning of the season, but all of a sudden, that offense just continues to blow my mind, like how consistent they are and how they get production from every single piece of it. I will say though, that Salt Lake defense, they were challenging New York late in that game. Like they had a moment towards the end of the third quarter where they maybe had 1 or 2 breaks in a row where like they had a big block from Tony Munga in the handler space. Ben Hoffman had like a big layout underneath. Like there was still a lot of that defensive pressure that like I said, New York doesn't tend to make mistakes, right? So like it's going to require active playmaking from the defense to put them in uncomfortable spots. It was just unfortunate that Salt Lake wasn't able to take advantage of enough of those break opportunities. I think that's where they fell short, but they absolutely can play with New York. I think it's just going to take a cleaner game on their D-line efficiency to get the job done if they meet again. Fingers crossed, man. That was a fun game.
I mean, all I want now is for them to meet a championship weekend, and particularly because of the absolute nitrous fluid that was poured on it with the Ben Yacht spiking incident. Which
right.
We've been sort of like gauze wrapping that for its own little discussion, because of course we have to talk about the Ben Yacht triple spike celebration that almost led to his ejection.
Legendary.
Instead, Salt Lake head coach Bryce Merrill uses the integrity ruling to bring him back into the game, and then gives the best soundbite ever available that this league has ever created in the halftime interview, talking about Yacht.
He's so right, by the way. They are literally sucking oxygen throughout the Colorado game. They have cans of oxygen that I didn't think that was a thing that teams did. I mean, New York's training staff is like one of the best in the league, so it didn't surprise me so much, and it made sense since this was their first trip playing at altitude. But yeah, Merrill was spot on with his reasoning and analysis.
Yeah, cans of gas not being a metaphor, being literal. Like Ben Yacht was sucking cans of gas. He wasn't trying to be derogatory. But I want to save the Yacht thing for a minute because I just wanted to get back. Salt Lake's offense was super impressive. Obviously, the playmaking from Junabile, Kerr at times, Lindsley came alive in the second half and kind of kept that unit going. I was as much impressed by the execution, though, as I was by their commitment and discipline to their attack. Because what happens so often when New York does start to get through on defense, when they do get a break or two, you see the other teams begin to panic a bit in their response. They want to either start going star mode and start trying to throw haymaker for haymaker with New York, or they get too tight and too possession focused, and it allows for New York to blitz in the lanes and sort of continue to play like they're running downhill at you. I thought Salt Lake did a fantastic job of keeping composed and continuing those really fast ratchet drives, which start out with possession and then end up with like a receiver streaking away into space. I really thought that they, again, I've used it already like 4 times this episode, but they were very admirable in how their commitment showed throughout all 4 quarters, and they never really diminished in sort of the verve that they stepped out onto the field on those offensive possessions. And you could just see from even the night before, it's very easy to allow New York to get to you at any course in a game, at any point in a game. And so Salt Lake didn't do that, and I think they really did acquit themselves as kind of the number 2 team right now in the league. They seem to really assert themselves in that standing.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. What do you think, by the way, of Grant Lindsley kind of slotting in as like center handler on offense? Like he's bounced around a little bit between offense and defense this year. He hasn't been around for every shred game. Obviously, you can't doubt Grant Lindsley's ability to slot in anywhere, but I just thought that was an interesting decision where he took on a pretty high volume role, like maybe for the first time this season.
Yeah, and I think you saw a little bit of sticky points in the first half when he was in that role. I thought there were arrhythmias that resulted in some New York opportunities. There was one point where he almost got stalled inside the red zone and got off the reset throw, but it very much kind of stagnated the offense in a place that the Shred don't normally get bogged down. They love that mid-range in the attacking half of the field to set up that like whirling dervish of give and goes. And it felt like with the kind of gravity that Grant demands when he has the disc, there is a little bit of stop and watching, right? And that's not a characteristic of the Shred offense. They are a million moving pieces all in rhythm. And with Lindsley not necessarily having a ton of reps in live game environments in that specific role, I thought it showed against the defense, the caliber of New York, right? Like, and then there was the turnover in the red zone where Jacob Miller, through one of his 4 throwaways of the entire year, led Grant a little too far.
He's trying to get the trailing edge.
Tried to get the vintage, like he has made so many trailing edge layout grabs in his career, and it felt like a throw that Miller makes to Grant and nobody else, right? Every other throw Miller has thrown this entire year is like centering level chest passes or the most pillow soft leading you hucks. It felt like maybe the only decision he's tried all year to really push a limit point, right? And it was because it's Grant Lindsley. You totally understand it in the moment. But against New York, those are the subtle missteps that lead to break opportunities, and that's exactly what New York did with that. They took it down to the other end of the field, and I believe they converted on a Ben Yacht goal. And to your point earlier about the kinds of weapons that New York's defense has, Ben Yacht just founded his own club this weekend. 300 assists, 300 goals in his career. Only player ever to do that by kind of a margin right now. I think Cam Brock's starting to approach 300 assists, but I think he's still, I would have to go and look at that. But, you know, they have maybe the most dynamic goal scorer this league has ever seen on their defense. John Randolph threw a boatload of assists this weekend and continues to step in more and more into the true leader of that counterattack. He's got a Callahan winner and is largely considered, I think, to be one of the most talented players on the roster at this point. He's having a phenomenal 2023 year. Like, it's not fair, man. Like, it's not fair.
It's really not. Like Ben Katz too, like, who still probably doesn't get talked about enough, is just also, I want to shout out Ben Katz's fakes real quick. I was filming a lot of the game from my handheld. He gets me. He's got like such a good wrist snap on his fakes. He was getting me a lot. But like the Katz Randolph, just like 1-2 punch that they can throw on the counterattack, and then just opening up something deep for Yacht or Brownlee or Antoine Davis. Like, there's too many options, and you have to remember this is an opposing O-line that's guarding all of these guys. It's guys that probably don't want to be out there playing defense more often than not. So yeah, I just think you see that advantage, especially towards the end of the game, where, you know, the O-line's maybe a bit more tired, and you still have these elite offensive players that are just like coming down like extremely hard every single time.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm thinking, I'm moving ahead. We got to talk about it. Let's just talk about it. Let's peel off the couch cover. It's the Ben Yacht Spike stuff. It was one of the biggest moments live that I've ever seen. Like, everyone just reacted to it. So Ben Yacht catches a score in coverage, kind of a vintage jump ball scenario for the 2-time MVP. He gets banged a little right before he makes the catch. McKay Jorgensen on Salt Lake is tracking the disc. Yacht has better positioning behind him. And as often happens for the large frame of Yacht, there's a little bit more physicality that gets tolerated in his vicinity. And so Jorgensen, pedaling backward, trying to make a play in a very key situation, sort of bumps into Yacht. Yacht, being who he is, very accustomed to that, just goes up strong with two hands, gets the goal, proceeds to atomic spike it one time on the edge, pick it back up. I believe actually the first time Jorgensen hands it to him, because
what happened was, I mean, the first spike lands right by McKay's feet. Like, it was kind of very close to at the defender. But yeah, then McKay picks it up, and then Yacht just kind of like takes it from him to continue spiking 2 more times, because one wasn't enough.
Right. But the latter 2 were not necessarily like directed at McKay.
No, he was like walking off the field. Yeah, it was only the first one I thought was like a direct spike at his defender that he skied.
Right. And so a player spikes the disc 3 times. It's obviously a flagrant foul. It's obviously something that should be enforced and discussed about with the refs. But to this point, there's no precedence for this level of even energy, emotion, aggressiveness, shall you say, throughout any part of this game, right? There's not a physical interaction. There's not like bad bids or something. This is the 2-time MVP taking a little bit more bump in coverage than he would appreciate and letting them know who he is very emphatically. Deserves a penalty, deserves some kind of assessment, probably even an extracurricular conversation with the refs about just, I think the degree to which he brought it was a little excessive. But sure, I'm going to be lying if I didn't say if I wasn't a member of the Empire, that would absolutely fired me up. The big guy just going off, and especially the way that the Salt Lake crowd responded immediately with just cascading boos, which is their right. I'll take both sides here. If I'm an Empire player, I am hooting and hollering at that. And if I'm in,
they were high-fiving him. Everyone was high-fiving him as he came off the field. You see that? Like, all his teammates were into it.
Of course they were. And if I'm the Salt Lake faithful, I'm calling that a war crime, and I'm hoping that the ejection sticks. So, anyways, after the 3rd spike, and after there's just kind of this absolute pinnacle of just emotion and sports wildness, the head referee of Salt Lake ejects Yacht. The absolute pandemonium is happening at this point. I mean, on the broadcast, they were trying to go to a commercial, and after talking with Evan Lepler, it sounds like they had to just abort entirely and just stick live, and thank goodness that they did. So we get this just weird period of like this height. You can hear from the crowd. There's just 2,000 people talking about the exact same thing all of a sudden. Throughout all this, head coach of Salt Lake, Bryce Merrill, decides that he would like to use an integrity ruling to flip the head ref's decision of ejection and keep Ben Yat in the game. Of course, Merrill then goes on to be asked about it in the halftime interview and gives one of the best quotes that I've ever heard in this league and maybe ever in sports. He was just so prepared for that moment, basically talking about how he didn't want to let Yacht off easy and how he wanted him to stick through the full 4 quarters and face his Salt Lake Shred, which is just, as people have been saying online and elsewhere, like, I feel like Bryce Merrill could form a little militia off of that speech to go play ultimate games for him. Like, that was an absolute like Semper Fi moment for him. Like, he rallied the troops super hard. I don't think that the Shred actually got to see it live, which is unfortunate because they were in the locker room, but I would have stormed the field if I would have saw that from my coach as a Shred player. Like, that was just like, hats off, sir. It was just, to kind of wrap it all up, I just even breaking the fourth wall a little bit as a commentator and somebody who loves this league, like, I love moments like that. Like, just the true chaoticness of sports, but also wrapped up in kind of a true competitiveness that I think defines itself in the sincerity of looking your opponent eye in the eye and saying, I don't want this to go anywhere. Like, I want you for a challenge. And for Bryce Merrill to bring that out of this particular matchup, I just thought that meant the world. I really applaud him for how he handled that situation. I think it could have gone 1,000 different directions, and I think most of them would have been bad. I think it would have been very easy for a coach in that situation with the home crowd reacting that way to lean into it and to kind of assume Yacht to be a worse person or a worse player than maybe he was in a particularly fired up moment. And for Merrill to just sort of very cleverly say, I'm not done with you yet. You stay in this ring with me. I just, that was cool, man. That was really cool. It was
very cool. I loved pretty much everything about it, except the initial decision to eject Ben Yat. Like, I haven't analyzed the AUDL rulebook. I don't actually know what warrants an ejection, but to me, like, if it wasn't an overly dangerous or overly physical play where you're like putting someone in harm or risk of injury, then I don't really see the point of an ejection for an excessive celebration. I am with you that like it should have been just like a big yardage penalty and like, yeah, probably some other conversation, but an ejection felt too big considering what that moment was. And so, yeah, huge props to Merrill for just saying like, yeah, Ben Yat, I mean, I know you just did that, but stay in the game, play with us, and we'll see what happens. I also don't think anyone would have felt good. Not that no one would have felt good, but there would have been a bit of an asterisk if Ben Yat left the game and the second half went differently and maybe Salt Lake comes out with the win and then people are just like pointing at that moment as maybe the reason. So I think maybe part of it was like, didn't want any excuses to lose to or beat New York. I just, yeah, love that decision. Love the 3 spikes. The last 2 were better than the first one. Yeah, we can leave it at that, I guess.
And like, it's again back to that thing of like steel sharpens steel. New York scheduled this road trip for the specific challenge of what these 2 best in the West teams would bring them. And it's interesting to see now Salt Lake following a similar blueprint after getting their shot at the reigning champs of, hey, we want no excuses in this matchup against you guys. This is as important for us as it is for you. And we need to seize on that, being the younger team, being that we haven't gotten to where your franchise has, but we aspire to that. And to, again, just kind of see Merrill as kind of the ambassador for that franchise, look eye to eye with the 2-time MVP, arguably the best player in this league's history in Ben Yat, and to just say, like, you're here in our stadium.
Did he cement his Coach of the Year campaign with that halftime interview? Maybe.
Maybe. It's just that I think that there are some really prominent other candidates out there. I'm thinking of
there are good candidates everywhere.
Oakland, and I think Ben Feldman and the coaching staff in Minnesota deserves a whole bunch of shouts. And I didn't vote for them last year, but the New York coaching staff of Anthony Nunez and Charlie Hoppes, I think their ability to continue to steward and implement and keep this team focused just kind of flies under the radar. I know we talk all about talent. Talent doesn't win you everything. And I think that that's been really exposed sometimes in this league. And I know that New York has an unprecedented amount of it, but at the same time, I still think that their coaching staff deserves a heap of flowers for how they continue to evolve everything there. I think it would have been very easy for the motivation to have fallen a bit by the wayside at this point. And they clearly have an internal engine that just exists outside of whatever we think about New York, right?
Well, and I just love that the New York players are staying as hungry as ever. Like, that is just embedded in their culture, right? Like, I think there's maybe some thought that after winning the second championship in 3 years, another undefeated season, like, there wasn't the same motivation to, like, get back to the championship game. But man, these guys just, I heard it many times in person at the end of the Colorado game or towards the end of the Colorado game. They love winning. The players will say that they love winning games, and I believe it. And that is, like, it's their culture. Everyone's bought in, and their confidence is obviously through the roof. So I think they live for these games where they can, like, come out in front of a crowd of 2,000 plus people and really make themselves known to the entire world, even more than they have already.
Yeah, you brought it up earlier in the episode. We were wondering how they would kind of step into this villain role a little bit on the road facing these teams, and it fits them really
exceeded
nice.
expectations. The villain role was fully embraced.
Well, I mean, their hashtag internally for the team all weekend was "Pray for the West," and I really think that this brings on the evil empire, right? Like, this is the true formation of that sort of spirit where, yeah, they won all these games, and now they're sort of the Yankees or something of this league where it's part not to root for them. And I think they embrace that more than ever. And you can just see it from the personalities. Obviously, Yacht, but I mean, Ryan Osgar, he had an absolutely hot weekend there in the hot temperatures. Like, he leads the league now in assists. He's got 58 on the season. Of course, his scoring complement in Jeff Babbitt, also the league leader in goals. They just continue to play at a level that is simply untouchable right now. I mean, you saw it firsthand in Colorado. They talked about it on the broadcast. We've talked about it before, but I think it bears repeating. Jeff Babbitt's foot speed at his size is jaw-dropping. Like, it's just, you can't do anything with the man. They made a joke on broadcast. I think it was Chuck Kindred who talked about, you know, how do you guard him? And someone responded, you just hope he didn't want to score a goal at that point. And it seems that way at times. If he's not tired, it's just kind of like, well, when's Jeff going to score this one? Like, when are they going to work it down into range? And then it's you trying to keep up sideline to sideline with a freight train. Like, Sandy Brown did a good job at the beginning of that game on him. He had that fantastic open field sky block on Babbitt. But as he's done in almost every single matchup against other teams' top defender or top priority in trying to defend him, he simply wears him down. And by the third and fourth quarter, it becomes this carousel of different options trying to do something against Jeff Babbitt. And it's just, I don't know, man. Like, I know we probably think of throwers and stuff as being MVPs. And I do think, given his recent run, Osgar is re-solidifying his candidacy as possibly a repeat performer as the league's best player. But when you just distill it down to what is the most unstoppable asset that this Empire team has, I mean, I think everyone's going to say it's Jeff Babbitt. It's Jeff Babbitt. He gets hit like, and it's the little stuff too. Like, we get so carried away with, I think, the imposing nature and just his dimensions, like, kind of take up a larger than life thing. But it's the little things too, like the opening point of the Salt Lake game. You know, Salt Lake's defense, they get the turnover. They're in the red zone. Will Selfridge has a disc. He takes a very, very, very risky shot cross field.
He tests Babbitt.
He didn't know it was Babbitt. And that's the thing, right? Like, Jeff shaded that. Jeff was baiting that look. He was baiting that look from the middle of the stack. He got the second-year player who just turned 20 a couple years ago to get a little caught up in the moment, want that first score of the game. He threw directly into a Babbitt poach. And it's just arguably the league's most talented and smartest defender is currently playing offense for the Empire. And he continues to have these plays where he just wins the disc back and absolutely demolishes any team's hope for a momentum on a break score. And it's just, I don't know, like, I think my logic-centered brain is gravitating towards, like, Oscar MVP again, but I feel like my gut, it's Babbitt still. It's the guy we picked at the midway point. Like, he's just, he's unstoppable.
It's going to be a debate because, yeah, I mean, obviously, like, Oscar doesn't bring much or anything to the table as a defender. He did get a block against Salt Lake. Give him credit for a block. And yeah, I think Babbitt.
that was so unnecessarily like low in his defending. I mean, he's not Babbitt, but
no, it's fine. I just mean like that's obviously not the reason why he's in the MVP conversation. As opposed to you look at some other players like Sean McDougal, for example, maybe like the most well-rounded player in that he is good at literally everything, offense and defense. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you in terms of like the unstoppable nature of Jeff Babbitt, both offensively and defensively. However, I still feel like throwing is probably the most impressive part of the game to me still. So it feels like throwing is almost essential to have some aspect of that contribute to an MVP campaign. I will give Babbitt credit for a huck attempt in Salt Lake, right? He does air it out sometimes. But yeah, I just think it's, again, it's going to be a debate this offseason because it is like, yeah, do you take the guy that literally no one has an answer for ever? Or do you take the guy who is just almost as unstoppable in a variety of offensive ways, but particularly his throwing talent? And I think I'm always going to lean throwing a little bit.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see who also emerges as we push into the playoffs, right? I mean, this team still has playoff Jack. Maybe he takes on more of a load. It seems like he's also just kind of lingering a bit more in the background. Like he still has a player two.
He's always so good.
Where he reminds people he's Jack effing Williams. But like, other than that, it feels like they're sort of like breaking in case of emergency or really saving the ramp up for playoffs where he just continues to shine. But yeah. I still think that there deserves to be larger discussions around the general MVP.
Of course,
like, I'm not just trying to like settle on it's Oscar or Babbitt heading into
no. But it's also like the trajectory of New York at this point. Like if they win the championship, I expect the MVP to come from that team.
And it's a little bit of an undeniable trajectory right now, right? Again, like what do you kind of say about this team? 26 straight wins. 18 straight limiting opponents to less than 20 goals, league leader in assists, league leader in goals, first in blocks, first in goals allowed, 5 games now in a row with 13 or less turnovers. It's the resume of a championship team, but it ain't over until it's over, and there is still obviously a lot of competitors looking to knock them off of their throne. Let's get to just talking about a couple of the other matchups, starting with the big one in the Bay between LA and Oakland. LA took quite a lead in this game behind a bunch of playmaking from Sean McDougal in the first half. As you just mentioned, he remains maybe the most impactful two-way player this year. They had him on offense. He was completing hucks. He switches over to defense for a couple points, gets a backside interception, throws a break score in a transition huck look. He's just everywhere and everything for this team at times when they need him, but couldn't quite sustain that level of play into the second half. And that's where things just went off the rails for LA's offense. I think they scored their 18th goal with about a little over 4.5 minutes to go in regulation. They scored 1 goal the remaining almost 10 minutes of game clock, including the end of fourth quarter and overtime. And it was a complete collapse for the Aviators. And on the flip side, for Oakland, it was once again showing of their ability to just, at any point in which they have an opportunity in the second half of these home games that they have, they're just gangbusters on it. And it doesn't matter who. They didn't play Mac Hecht. We were wondering going into the weekend, well, he's stressed. Are they going to play Mac Hecht? They won at home without him against Colorado. Do they need Mac Hecht? That's not an actual question we're asking. Mac Hecht has been amazing for them. But he didn't play. And in his stead, 2 players making their pro debut played out of their minds in Matt Barcelos and Kyle Lou. Lou, I believe, led the team in completions. He threw the game winner in overtime to Walker Frankenberg, who also had an amazing second half to this game. Matt Barcelos, equipped in like Pit Viper shades, out of nowhere is throwing X-wing buzzer beaters, is getting layout blocks in the reset lane in the fourth quarter. Barcelos, Lou, the Oakland Spiders continue to get week after week the ability to plug in some of the youngest players in the AUDL and get these pristine, impactful performances out of them. And I just think it goes back to what we were talking about a moment ago of Bryce Merrill being a possible coach of the year. I think Dan Silverstein in Oakland deserves a heap of praise and possibly an award for what he's done with the Spiders. We had a whole bunch of hype for them coming into the season. Oakland has an intensely knit inner culture. They really believe in their group of guys. It's a really fun and vibrant atmosphere to be around. But with that, you've got to take some of it in a kind of token with a grain of salt, because they're a little overconfident in themselves at times. But that kind of energy has clearly served them beneficially in 2023, because they have arrived much sooner as a potential competitor in the West than I think anyone outside of Oakland thought possible this year.
Right. I mean, I'm still just like trying to wrap my head around how they've gotten the level of production out of their young guys that they have. Like it's a big mix of like rookies and then just like second and third year players, but like you said, there is a lot of variance within that, but the way they have like risen to the occasion multiple games now, and I don't know, I still don't know what it is about their home crowd. Like I guess it's just the overall energy in that environment, and maybe because they're so young, they're like more inclined to really rally behind that. But there's like some magic going on, because they were down by 6 at the end of the third quarter, and like it wasn't just them like taking advantage of every single break opportunity. Like the wheels were just falling off LA. So like I'm really curious to see how things shake out this next weekend going to LA, because I'm sure Oakland has a lot of confidence, but at the same time, they only completed only converted just over 30% of their offensive possessions. So like there's still so much fine tuning that has to happen. But like in terms of an X factor, if a whole team can be an X factor, it's Oakland, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think they might be the biggest X factor of any division outside of the South and Carolina Flyers. And they're not so much of an X factor as they simply do what Carolina has done a couple seasons, which is take the regular season schedule as more of an experimentation and development process for their playoff aspirations. You know, they're not quite 2 years removed from a championship. And so that process works for Carolina. But to call them an X factor doesn't feel quite appropriate. I really feel like Oakland is the true X factor, because to your point, these wins aren't necessarily clean. Even against Colorado,
they're really not.
A season-defining victory at home a few weeks back, that wasn't exactly a sterling performance of efficiency. And I think that speaks to what makes this Oakland success even more impressive, is that this is a young team not winning because they're getting the best performance of their lives. They're winning because they figured out how to win as a squad. You know, like they're not doing it through, oh, Keenan's had his 6th straight absolutely amazing game on offense where he's averaging 28 yards a touch and 0 turnovers and 6 total scores. Like Keenan Lawrence had kind of an off game against the Aviators. Dexter Clyburn and a couple other young pieces made mistakes. Walker Frankenberg, despite scoring the game winner, had 3 throwaways. What's really weird about Frankenberg, he's had 3 throwaways 3 different times this year. In his other starts, he's got 0 combined. Just weird little stat nugget I found while I was looking through their page. But the favorite right now for Rookie of the Year, Walker Frankenberg, like he didn't have a great first half. Like there are inconsistencies, but I think that makes some of this all the more impressive, because young teams aren't supposed to be able to rally within a game and figure out their mistakes and come back from them. It's supposed to kind of be a tale of, oh no, it's kind of coming apart for them this game. I guess they'll have to figure it out next game. And that's how it felt when McDougal was just pouring it on in the first half and Aviators are creating this separation, and Oakland seems to be succumbing to kind of the youthful errors that they're prone to. And yet there's the energy, the momentum simply overwhelms every other quality, right, in the back half of these games. And it's intoxicating to watch, quite frankly. Like, it's just, you're just strapped in and on for the ride. Like, at a certain point, you just go, what could happen next? You know?
Right. It's also like, you just feel it in all of their celebrations too. After literally every goal, like someone's getting tackled, someone's getting like thrown up in the air, someone's screaming. Like it's contagious, and it's hard not to root for them.
They've got at least 3 team-wide program celebrations. They've got the ballerina, where they all like twirl around together. They've got snowflakes, where they all get on the ground and start doing snow angels. And then they've got the boat, the rowboat, the kind of like Viking ship, which is, I think, where it all sort of started. They started doing that in the beginning half of last year when they started 0-5, and it had a decidedly different feel to it then. It felt very much more like summer campground activities. It's like, oh, that's nice. They're getting into the end zone and scoring sometimes. They should celebrate. And now it's like, oh, this is a team that really feeds off of that juice. This is a propellant, you know? This isn't just fun and games. This is really team culture, team motivation. This comes from a very sincere place. And I think that journey has been really amazing to watch in just over, what is it now? 14 months of play since the beginning of last year. So Oakland just continuing to rise. And again, we'll set up the full playoff picture, but this sets up a Friday night meeting in LA with the Aviators. If Oakland wins that game and then also wins on Saturday night in San Diego, they will host a playoff game, basically usurping the 2nd seed from the Colorado Summit. Summit, of course, had their 3-game losing streak in the middle of the season. They sustained a loss last Friday to the reigning champs. Just kind of a tough blow for a Colorado team that has otherwise looked clearly like the 2nd best team in the West, and yet if the Spiders simply continue to ride this lightning one more weekend, Summit could be facing a very, very tough opening round in the Bay against the Spiders team, where it's just anything could happen. Anything is possible.
It's so different than how we thought this season was going to go, right? Like, Colorado could have gone undefeated this year, and I don't think any of us would have been surprised by that.
Their 3 losses in the middle of the season were each by a goal. It wasn't that far off. And you wonder what a fully confident Summit team looks like being undefeated going up against the Empire last Friday looks like. Because I think that was the thing that struck me in the 4th quarter as the Empire separated and just got me reflecting on like where Colorado is this season versus last. And we talked about it a little, but like there's not that confidence. There's not that big triumphant kind of Nethercuts hucking over the top, Tatum and AG are blowing up passes on defense. Like there's it for moments. There's like little bits. There's explosive moments. There's the Sandy Brown block. There's the Jay Fruits guy against New York, but there's nothing just like sustained in the same way that the Summit were last year. And it's just They've had a lot less consistency. They had so much consistency last year. It was really like the same starting offense, same starting defense, pretty much the entire year. This year, they've been like Danny Landesman has only played 1 game this year. Calvin Stoughton has only played like a few games. We haven't really seen the top end roster of the Summit team yet, and it showed. Like Nethercuts only played 6 or 7 games for the team this year after playing most of them last year. It's just been a different and consistent year, but it still leaves the door open for a huge playoff run if they can put it all together, you know, in the postseason. But at this point, I can't. I mean, it's going to be tough if Oakland does host that home playoff game. The Summit, knowing that they lost the last time in Oakland, and knowing what they had to deal with there, they're going to be. I don't know. They're going to have to be really dialed in to win that game. I mean, it would. I use this as a very loose analogy, but it's kind of like giving a monkey a handgun to give this young Spiders team that kind of an opportunity, right? Like, there's just no telling. I feel like it could lead to an Oakland victory in these same precarious ways that they've been constructing them at home throughout this regular season. I feel like it also could be kind of overconfidence in them, and suddenly the Summit get to be an underdog on the road with possibly Stoughton and Landesman slotting back into the lineup. They get added firepower. They've got motivation after losing the last matchup. Like, that could also be kind of a bitter pill for Oakland, where it seems like it's this fantastic opportunity, but really these Oakland wins,
like we don't know how sustainable they are.
Thin ice, like all the confidence and praise is deserved. They are at 7-3. They do have the inside track for the number 2 seed in the West, but man, it is a slim margin between very, very different, I think, perceptions around the Spiders team. But again, hats off. They do win. We need to move on. Let's talk about the general playoff picture at the end of this episode. So we've got 10 of 12 playoff teams confirmed. Both the Central and the South are completely locked up. The 1 seed in the Central is Minnesota, followed by Indy, and then Chicago. Indy will host the first round matchup with Chicago, and the winner of that will advance to the Central Division Championship game in Minnesota. In the South, Atlanta is first, Austin is second, Carolina is the 3 seed. Carolina will travel to face Austin in the opening round, and the winner of that will face the Hustle in Atlanta in the South Division Championship game. In the East Division, obviously New York has wrapped up the 1 seed. DC has secured the 2 seed, I believe, because they would own any tiebreaker scenario with the potential 7-win Boston team that could equalize them, or even Toronto possibly, and just a wild out there.
DC is at 8.
Oh, no,
they have
I'm
8
sorry.
wins.
They're 8 wins. They've locked it up. I'm sorry. That is my mistake. DC is 8-3. Okay. They've wrapped up the 2 seed. They will host the first round playoff game, which is still waiting to be decided in the 3rd seed. It will come down to the final weekend. Toronto is still alive at 5-5, but all Boston has to do to secure their first ever playoff berth is win a game at home against the winless Royale. Now, it will be interesting to see if a Montreal team who has struggled with roster inconsistencies as much as any team in the league this year, which is a huge reason why they have just lacked any kind of scoring output and also wins in the standing column. But I think that there could be enough motivation for the Real to simply avoid a completely over season and just knocking Boston down a little bit of a peg. So it will be interesting to see if Boston can continue their momentum. I expect Boston to close out. How Boston has been playing lately indicates that they will close this out relatively easily, but Royale are a team with a lot of pride, and I think that hasn't shown up at all this year, and it explains part of their winless condition, but we've seen crazier things this year, clearly.
Yeah, it is funny, because you're right, I don't view the Royal as bad of a team as their record indicates. I mean, yes, like you said, the consistency has been all over the place, and that's why they've been winless, but yeah, I don't doubt their individual talent and the ability that some of these guys have to take over a game. So it will be worth watching. And Boston can't take that game for granted either, obviously. They have to come in with all the confidence, with all the motivation that they want to take this playoff seed for themselves.
Right. And then the other unsettled division, of course, we were just talking about the West. Salt Lake has wrapped up the 1 seed. They will host the West Division Championship game at 11-1, but we still have yet to see who the 2 seed will be. Colorado, oddly enough, has ended their season. They're 8-4, and they've already locked up a playoff spot. But if you go to the AUDL.com or look at any of the standings pages, 7-3 Oakland sits right above them. They still have 2 games to play. Of course, on Friday night against LA in the game of the week, and then also on Saturday against the Growlers team, who is continuing to backpedal out of the 2023 season. Again, Growlers broke their postseason streak this year, not making it to the playoffs for the first time since 2017, I think. Yeah. But similar to Royale, San Diego is a team with a lot of pride and history. It would be so interesting if they did have a say in the playoff picture in this division, despite being well eliminated from the postseason themselves in the final regular season weekend. Again, they could really upend the Spiders if Oakland were even to win on Friday. San Diego still has the possibility of completely changing who gets to host that all-important home first-round game in the West Division. It's one of those weekends where, yes, there's not a whole bunch of drama, especially compared to what just happened this weekend, but given the two teams that have the opportunity to throw a monkey wrench into the divisional playoff chaos in Montreal and San Diego, I think it bears a little bit more interest than in normal conditions. Like these are interesting opponents. And particularly because Boston and Oakland are not some kind of blue blood playoff performer that we're used to seeing in these positions, closing out and making it into the postseason. And so it'll be a big test for two of the up and coming teams in the Spiders and the Glory.
I realize, like, I've still been thinking that LA is very much in the playoff race. So, like, it's still not a guarantee that Oakland makes it. And while that's true, even if LA beats Oakland, Oakland can still beat San Diego and clinch their playoff spot. Like, Oakland would get to 8 wins. So, I mean, LA just needs help from San Diego at this point, which is also a funny situation to be in, considering that historic rivalry in SoCal. So yeah, a lot of interesting storylines in SoCal this weekend. I can't wait. Last thing I want to say, I just want to comment on the South playoff picture real quick. I think this is like the most interesting way the South standings could have worked out. I love the fact that Carolina, like you said, is still only a couple years removed from a championship, but they're coming in as the 3 seed. Like, they have the most difficult postseason path, having to go on the road to Austin, then if they win that, on the road to Atlanta. Austin, on the other hand, is hosting a home playoff game, which like very much keeps them in the conversation for going to championship weekend. And then Atlanta, being the 1 seed, like this is the first time they've ever been in this spot, and it's probably going to be their best shot at any to actually go to championship weekend. So like I'm really excited to see how the South playoff picture shapes out once we get to the postseason. But still got one more regular season week remaining, so I got to pump the brakes a little bit.
And it will be a really interesting one, like we were just singing up. There's a possibility for a lot of poetic justice to come up and out of the woodwork in Week 13. The final regular season weekend of the 2023 season approaches. That will do it for this Week 12 recap episode. We hope you enjoyed it half as much as we do even. I'm just over the moon after the results and all the action from across the league. Be sure to check out the AUDL.com as well as the AUDL social media channels for continuing coverage. We will be back with you in just a couple of days to again preview Week 13, final weekend of the regular season, barreling towards this playoffs. I, for one, am more excited for this postseason than I think any other. As you were just setting up in the South, and I think in the other 3 divisions, we are set up for some absolutely mind-blowing competition as we move into August and playoffs. Again, we will be back on Thursday to preview the upcoming weekend of games, but we thank you as always for tuning in here and now. We'll be talking to you soon. Bye now.